Welcome to the Christine Upchurch Show. You might be listening live on 1150 AM KKNW in the Seattle area, sunny Seattle today. You might be listening live anywhere around the world on transformationtalkradio.com. You might be listening after the fact on one of the many places that sends up dozens of podcasts and christineupchurch.com. But wherever and whenever, we're very grateful you joined us here today, and I think you will be too, because we've got a wonderful guest, somebody who's been on my must-have list for a very long time. And I'd like to say hello to the man behind some of the technology today, Mr. Benny Mathers. Hey, Benny.
Hey, Christine, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's a different kind of setup today. Instead of being in the studio and you control all sorts of things, I've had to get things set up here in a quiet corner of my house. I'm crossing my fingers. It's a quiet corner. I've piled pillows against the door so that if my cats are scratching and meowing to get in, our listeners won't hear too much of it.
I feel like it might make that worse, because then they're like, what's the matter with Mom? Is she okay? We need to save her.
If it were just audio, I'd probably let them in, although there is always a risk of a cat fight nearby. But it's just like them to climb up onto the computer, and I figured we'd lose our Zoom connection, and that would be that.
Curious, anyway. That's what they are all about. That's okay. That's why we love them. It is good to see your face regardless. I know mine is a little behind the scenes for today. No big deal.
Yeah, and I miss being in the studio with you, Benny. And life's gotten to be very strange right now, and there are a lot of people who have been experiencing loss of one sort or another. Some have been experiencing the most significant loss you can imagine. That is the loss of a loved one. Some are losing their good health. But for many people, it's really just the loss of life as normal. I mean, some have been losing their jobs, some have been losing their living situation, some have been losing their offices for a little while. But for many, this sense of normalcy has gone. And our future is a little less certain than it felt like it was before. And our guest today, she experienced one loss after another, and she came to learn that there are great gifts in that. So I think we've got a very important topic today. And our guest today is Joffre McClung. And I have to tell you, I met her in New York City, and I tell you, she was, I felt an instant connection with her. And we've got this Southern connection, this Texan connection. We'll talk a little bit about that. But she's got a fascinating background. She's a former theater actress in New York City. She eventually went into film producing and acting. Her film won an award in France. And then her mother got ill, and she had to leave her beloved city of New York, her beloved career, to take care of her mom. And then she experienced another loss, and we'll talk about that. And through her own process, she has developed great insight and wisdom about what's important in our lives. And I'm so excited about our guest today, Joffre McClung. Hello, Joffre.
Hey, Christine, how are you? I'm so glad to be with you finally.
I'm thrilled to have you here. And I know we've been talking about it for a while, and we do, a show every single week. And I think I've done probably 350 shows so far, somewhere.
Yeah, about that. Yeah, you're up there. Getting up there.
And it's the sort of thing where I thought, well, I've had Joffre on. And then I realized it's because you and I were on a show together a while back, Joffre. And it's like, no, she hasn't been on the Christine Upchurch show. She's got to be on it. And I love your latest books. Joffre's an author of various books, and her latest one is How Learning to Say Goodbye Taught Me How to Live. And The Heart of the Matter is another one. So Joffre, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your series of losses and the impact it had on you? Because, we can sugarcoat it at this point because you have grown so much and developed so much wisdom. But take us back to where you were having one loss after another and trying to put some perspective into it.
Oh, I can certainly talk about loss. That's for sure. Good Lord.
Mm.
Well, actually, my first loss was a dark night of the soul. And that's when I was back in New York and I left my ex partner, so to speak. He moved on and I moved on. And that was really my first loss that woke me up to the whole spiritual world. And that was in the early 80s, frankly. And that's when I started researching and reading every spiritual book possible, every personal growth book possible. I read everything I could get my hands on. And that really opened me up. And so then it began to change, and I began to realize we create our own reality through our belief system, our emotions. So that was great. That took me only so far, though. Yeah, it only took me so
Darn, you
far.
mean the books aren't enough?
No, they're not. Unfortunately, I read every book possible. This book will change my life. Now, they all together help change my life, but no one book's going to change your life. You're going to have to do the inner work. And that's what happened when my mother got sick.
Mm,
My mother got cancer. She lived alone. I was working in New York. I knew I could fly back and forth to the studio to do the producing I was doing. So I moved back to Texas to take care of her. And it was 2 years of really wonderfulness of being with her. And then
mm,
she passed and I was devastated.
mm.
We were always very close. From childhood on, we were very close. And losing her, I'd already lost my father 10 years earlier. So I had gone through that process, but I still had my mother. So I felt
Right,
safe. And
right,
then suddenly your mother's gone. So I don't care how old you are, you're an orphan. You
right.
could be 30, 40, 50, or 60. You're an orphan. And I was already doing my inner work to return to self love. But that really put me on the journey of realizing what's standing in my way. And it was the lack of self love. So
Uh-huh.
when she passed, my meditations, of course, I was grieving her. So I was doing that in meditation, healing my wounds, looking at what I was angry at her about from my childhood. Really, it was all piled on top of each
Right.
layer was piled on top of each other.
And Joffrey, I don't know about you, but when I lost my parents, one of the things I discovered is that when you lose a parent, you're not just it's not just about the loss of who they are to you in that at that stage of life. You have to process the loss from every stage, from various stages of childhood through adulthood. Did you find the same thing?
Oh, I definitely had to do every loss. There was in her older age, there was great love and wisdom. In her younger age, when there was drama in our family, I had to process that, let go of my anger at my mother. I don't
Mm,
care who you are, you have anger when somebody dies because you have different feelings at, like you said, at different times in your life with
yeah,
them. The
yeah.
older mother who passed, we were very, very close. The younger mother, we were close, but there were issues.
Mm,
And so that anger came up and I had to process that anger. I
mm.
processed that anger over and over again till finally I was drained of it and I was able to forgive the past and move forward with the future, frankly.
So, Joffrey, I know that there are plenty of people out there who believe that you should just sort of transcend that anger and somehow just move beyond it. What's your perspective on that?
I don't think you transcend it. I think you move into it. You move into
Mm,
the energy. You feel the energy and you look and say, why am I feeling that energy? At least that's
mm,
how I did it. Everyone does
mm,
it differently. But Christine, that's how I did it. I don't, I, to do anger, it took me a long time in my meditative work before my mother died to deal with my inner anger. That was an energy I didn't want to deal with
uh-huh.
because I had somebody in my family who lived in anger. My sister tended to live
Right.
in anger. So I disowned my anger. I wasn't going to be angry. So it took me a while in my spiritual work to own my anger. So I was comfortable with anger. And I think people do not need to run from their darker emotions. There's great lessons in those darker emotions. So I moved into
Absolutely.
my anger and I felt every ounce of it, frankly.
So there you were. You had moved from New York. You spent all that time, and based on what you've written, it sounds like there were some very challenging times and some very beautiful times with your mother as she was passing. And then, did life get back to normal?
No, it did not, Christine, at all. No, I'm sitting there grieving my mother, doing my inner homework, grieving her, and also moving to self love. And then I lost my job in New York. It was
Mm,
actually mutual. I just couldn't get this house together to sell. I could barely move. I was doing so much
mm,
inner work. So we basically I left my job. That broke my heart because
mm,
now I wasn't going to go back to New York, my
right,
city that I just loved from the time I was 8 years old. I knew I was going to live in New York City. I
right,
had to grieve that. So I grieved
yeah,
my job that was in producing and television. So it's still in creative. I had
mm,
to grieved losing New York City, which was another dream of mine. So
Sure.
I was grieving all of that. And then I find out that my best friend, who's like my soul sister, has breast cancer,
Oh my goodness.
stage 4 in the
Oh my.
bone. I
Oh,
mean, I hit the ceiling on that one.
yeah. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but one of the things that I found about loss is that it has a tendency to kind of make us look at how we define ourselves, because we often define ourselves in terms of our job, where we live, our relationships. And when those things disappear, then it's often kind of like, who am I? Um, and we're going to go into the story about your best friend and her cancer and the beautiful way that you helped her go to the other side. But we're going to go to a quick break. Stay tuned for more with Joffre McClung. Welcome back to the Christine Upchurch Show here on KKNW and Transformation Talk Radio. And by the way, if you want to see the live video, you can go to Facebook and go to the Transformation Talk Radio page where they're airing this live. So you don't have to watch the 11:50 a.m. KKNW feed if you don't want. If you're already on Facebook, check it out. Joffre, you had that your best friend, you got the news that she was not only did she have cancer, but it was stage 4 breast cancer. Had she had cancer before?
Yes, she had. She had cancer. She removed one breast. She didn't have insurance at the time in California, so she didn't do any follow-up, but I'm not saying that's the cause of it. She had that particular gene, the
Uh-huh.
breast cancer gene. So I think she was sort of destined in a sense. But it had moved to the bone because she
Oh
kept having
dear.
backaches and complaining. And I said, you got to go to the doctor. Well, they're going to want to do back surgery. I said, well, you got to find out what the pain is. And
Right.
it was the bone cancer. I mean, the breast cancer in the bone.
Oh,
It just breaks my heart when I think
which
about
is
it.
painful from what I understand.
It was, yes, it was very painful. And she didn't do any chemo because her doctors wanted her to, but she refused. And
Uh-huh.
she lived 5 years, which normally they
Wow.
say it's 2 years with chemo. So maybe she did the right thing by not doing chemo, but it was extremely painful. I mean, she was bones when I saw
Oh.
her, but she lived with it for 5 years. Good Lord. I don't know if I could do 5 years of that kind of pain.
Mhm. So you had helped your mother through the last couple of years of her life and processed a lot about losing her. How did helping your friend and losing her transform you even further?
Well, the thing with my friend is she started the spiritual journey the same time I did back in the early 80s. She lived in New York as well, and she was an actress, and we went to UT, University of Texas together.
Uh-huh.
So we were very, very close friends. So we'd already been doing our inner work, our inner meditation. Say, well, maybe you want to look here to change this. Maybe you want to go in here and heal that. Whatever it was we were working on, we shared everything. So
Uh-huh.
we decided that we were going to continue doing our homework. She was going to, she decided she was going to heal
Uh-huh.
herself. I said, okay, that's what your decision is. We'll go that route. And I was
Right.
going to continue doing my self-love work. So I kept doing my inner work and I began to notice the changes in me. And I used what Robin was telling me about her life, saying, okay, where do I have that in myself? So I began to
Right.
make changes and I began to see what she wasn't doing and what I was doing and what was working for me. So in a weird way, it was a good mirror for me
Uh-huh.
to see what was working in my life and what wasn't working in her life. And I was also determined to heal my past, to heal my childhood wounds, to really love myself, not just kind of like myself, kind of sometimes if I'm in the
No.
mood, but to really fall back in love with myself. So I was determined to heal my wounds. So I really used that time to go in there and heal those childhood wounds while she was trying to heal what was keeping her from loving herself,
Mhm.
healing herself.
And I know that there are a lot of people out there who think that self-love, they equate self-love with self-care, such as, giving yourself the time and space to have a candlelit bath or go walk in nature. How do you define self-love?
Well, I think those are wonderful things to do, but that's not really what I call self love. That's self care. And sometimes you can have self care without having self love.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm going to go and treat myself well. I'm going to give myself a spa day, but you're still lacking in self-love. Self-love to me, and this is something it was my journey, because I did this self-care all the time. I love to take care of myself. I had no problem with that. But I had
Right.
some other issues and other areas of self-love issues. The way I define self-love is that it's knowing in your heart that your core being, not necessarily your personality, because your personality gets formed through life and you make changes and you make decisions, you make negative beliefs to keep yourself safe. But your core being, who you came in here as, is lovable, loving, and loved. And lovable means you are worthy of love, not for what you do, not for what you're
Mm.
going to do, but because you are you, that you are loving, that you have this natural benevolence in your heart waiting to be expressed as you, which again can be done through relationships, can also be done through creativity or artistry or
Oh,
whatever
yeah.
else you're doing. Because mine was through my acting. That's how I expressed my loving heart. And that you're loved, you are valued, and you matter to the universe because you exist. Now, I had some areas I wasn't so good in that area, frankly,
Sure. Yeah.
Christine,
I get it.
but I did
And
do self care.
I think that oftentimes we're really good at the loving part, or, at least intermittently, we're good at the loving part. And well, sometimes we will receive love, but being lovable, I think for many of us, that's the most difficult thing to accept. What's your perspective on
Oh,
that?
I think that's definitely a tough one to accept. To know that you're worthy of love simply because you exist and you're here for a reason, all of those good things. That's a tough one because we think we got to earn it. We got to
Uh-huh.
prove we're lovable. We got to get somebody to love us first.
Sure.
And then we're lovable. And then if that person leaves us, which is what my Dark Night of the Soul was about, the first one, suddenly
Right.
we're not so lovable. Well, I got to get somebody else to love me. You got to realize you're lovable whether you live alone on top of a mountain and you're never going to see another human being again. You are still lovable.
Yeah.
That's and as far as loving, I would like to say one thing about loving. We can be loving, but it's also connected to that feeling that we're good enough in our loving. Because I think a lot of people don't feel like they're good enough in their loving. Otherwise, that person
Interesting.
wouldn't be so mad at them or so angry at them. That's
Okay.
one I had a little issues with because I had
Okay. So
anger
you
in my
you
family.
question your ability to love well
Hmm.
when others are not happy with you, whether it's something you truly did or if it's their own stuff. And oftentimes in relationships, we just trigger somebody else's stuff. And so if we question, are we very good at loving just because their stuff's triggered, then it kind of messes with us, doesn't it?
Oh, it messes with you big time, let me tell you. Because again, I had anger in my childhood. So that feeling that my loving could harm people, make them so angry at me, so hateful towards me, I
Mm.
must have been made wrong, which also had to do with my
Oh,
feeling of not mattering or being valuable to the universe or
mm.
worthy. All those three things sort of play together in a sense.
Uh-huh.
So my worthiness, because I created somebody who hated me, so I was not obviously not worthy of love. I didn't love well enough because I made people so angry.
Uh-huh.
And then on my value to matter, well, God kind of forgot me and gave me this situation. So obviously I don't matter. So all those sort of played
Yeah.
together for me.
So that's a really interesting point that you said. Because of the situation that you're presented with, you translated that into that God didn't love you, or you'd done something wrong, or that you weren't loved. Um, how is it that our negative situations or situations that don't make us happy are really a gift?
Oh, they are a big gift, even though you don't want them, frankly. You want
Mhm.
to run from them. But because I set up my life the way I set it up before I came here, I came into a family that did have some jealousy and anger issues coming from a sister. And there's only four of us, my mother and my father and my sister and I.
Okay.
And she was angry the moment I was born. So I had that in my face from the moment I was born that I should not be here. I'm
Uh,
wrong. Something's wrong with me. I caused her to be angry and jealousy. Now I look at it, now that I've done all the homework on it and actually forgiven her abuse
mm.
to my mother and to myself. Um, my sister just passed a month ago.
Oh, sorry.
Well, thank you very much. But I'm so glad I did this work before she passed because I was able to spend the last year with her, which I would not have done. because I was still so afraid of her and so angry at her abuse of me and her really taking my self-love away at such an early age. I
Yeah.
would not have spent that time with her. But because I was able to find my power back from the anger that she was doing and forgive her, I was able to be with her that last year. And
Mm.
and I'm very grateful I was, frankly.
How did that change her life in that last year?
I have to be honest with you. I think it changed her life in the sense that I was there for her. I made her meals from our childhood, so that she remember those meals that we had when we were younger.
Uh-huh.
I brought her tons of little treats and little cakes that she liked. I think she got to see that I was not this evil being that was taking mother's love away from her, that I was a
Mm,
good person. As far as her own inner work, I don't think she did her inner work in this lifetime, to be honest with you.
right.
But that's okay. She'll get many lifetimes to heal it. But
Mm,
I think she at least got to see that I was not as big of a threat to her as she had seen me as.
yeah.
But
So
I don't think
she
she did
treated
her
you
own.
badly because of her own woundedness, and you had evolved enough to not only identify it, because sometimes we're really aware of the reason that people are misbehaving, but we take it personally. So it sounds to me like you had transcended that, personalization of it, and instead understood it was her stuff, and that you were whole whether or not she treated you well.
That's definitely true. I think the trick for me was see, I did fight. I kind of knew something was wrong from childhood, telling my parents she needs help. So I
Oh,
intellectually knew something was wrong with her.
wow.
And I was like 6 or 7 when I told my parents she needs help. We got to stop this stuff. She's being mean. She's hit me. And I always knew that something was off in her in that sense of her anger, and because she'd go from 0 to 100 in 5 seconds. So I knew
Mm,
something was off on her. But when you hear every day that you're wrong, you're evil, you're disgusting, you're gonna live in the gutter. I mean, anything she could come up, she was good at hitting below the belt, whether it was
good.
my mother or myself. My father, she tried it. My father just left the room, said, I'm not playing this. But with
Uh-huh.
me, my mother and I, she would hit below the belt. You do that every day, it does take a bit of your self-love away. And that's
Sure.
okay. That's what I came to learn in this life, that I can find my way
Mhm.
back to self-love. So I
Yes.
had to have somebody take it away. And she did a very good job of taking it away from me, frankly.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about your story and your workbook is that you understand that there's a lot of work involved, getting down and dirty into the nitty gritty of the issues. And I know you've got several steps to help people deal with their own lives and to come to self-love. We're going to talk about that on the other side of the break. Stay tuned for more with Joffre McClung here in just a few moments. Welcome back to the Christine Upchurch Show here on KKNW and Transformation Talk Radio. I have guest Joffre McClung here today. She's the author of several books, an actress, a film producer, and a spiritual teacher. Uh, Joffre, I know that the first book you wrote, and I don't remember the title of it, but it was the story of you letting go of your best friend, and those last couple of years, and all the transformation you went through. And then it seems like you took a step back and said, wait a minute, people may be able to read this and get how I transformed my life and how I came to self-love, but there are going to be plenty of people who need some teaching points. So can you share with our listeners a little bit about what some of those teaching points are and how each of us can come deeper and deeper into self-love?
Oh, certainly. Well, I tell you, the first book was written and it was sort of the cliff notes of how to stay awake during loss. And then I realized, wait a minute, I didn't tell people how to get to self-love to begin with. So I
Mhm.
wrote the second book because I already done the first book, already put myself out there and told my spiritual side, which I'd kept fairly privately from my producing side, frankly, in New York,
Uh-huh.
and thought
Right.
that, well, I'm out of the closet. I might as well go all the way. So I wrote the second book, really highlighting how I did it. Everyone's going to do it differently.
Sure.
I mean, if I'd had my way, I would have gone to a therapist and talked some of this stuff out. But instead, I read the spiritual books and the personal growth books. So once I realized, okay, I did this myself, I need to share this with people. The main thing I wanted people to realize is they really do have everything they need inside of them to
Mm.
do this inner work. You don't need to have tons of money. You don't need to go there. If you can go to a therapist, go to a therapist. By all
Yeah.
means, go.
Yeah.
But
And
if you
I suggest going to a therapist who is very open to that spiritual side as well. Um, because sometimes as we go through the transformation, being able to connect the psychological and spiritual aspects of our journeys into an integrative approach is really helpful.
Oh, I think it's definitely the only reason I didn't do it because I didn't really have a therapist to go to down here. And on top of it, I had my best friend who we sort of acted as each other's therapist. Well, I would look here if I were you. So in a way, I did have a therapist. It was just my inner therapist. So I
Right.
want everyone to know they can do this inner work. You do have the tools. You can meditate. You can find your emotional body. You can connect with your higher self. And once you have those three tools that we all have down
Mm.
here, then you can go and look at your past wounds. Because I think so many of us are walking around reacting to the world from our past wounds
Mhm.
versus
So
healing.
just give us an example.
Well, for instance, if you're walking around and you tend to be quick to respond to somebody who says you're wrong about something. Perhaps your boss
Uh,
says you're wrong, and you're quick to defend yourself, to put
Uh-huh.
your fist up and say, "No, I am right." Well, you're coming from usually a past wound because otherwise you say, "Well, why? Tell me,
Uh-huh.
what do you mean? Maybe we can talk about this." You'd be much more open to hear somebody's opinion because that's all it really is, an opinion. But if your fists are up ready to fight, most likely you have a past wound that needs to be healed. My
Mhm.
past wounds went from 5 to 6 to my teenage years. Even my teenage years, I created some negative beliefs about the world and myself.
Uh-huh.
So I checked my past wounds and I realized I needed to quit being so afraid of people who were angry
Oh
because having
yeah.
found people who are so angry, I do not respond to people who are angry all the time. And I kept drawing angry people into my life. I thought,
It's
why am
funny
I
how that happens.
why do I keep drawing these angry people? Because I needed to heal my fear and take my power back from angry people.
Uh-huh.
So I was able to do that inner work and realize, people, you can do this, and it's done in layers.
Mhm.
I would heal something, I would live my life, and I realized, hey, I feel good. And then I'd hit another level, sort of what I call that wall again, and say, oh, I've got
Mhm.
something that's resistance here. Let me go back in. And I'd
Uh-huh.
hit a new level of anger or rage or hurt or fear that needed to be dealt with.
Uh-huh.
And the good thing about your wounds, at least what I found, your past wounds, is once you heal your past wounds, you don't have to do it again.
Right.
Now, does it mean you
Yeah.
don't have knee jerk reactions? I still have knee jerks to anger, but they're
Mhm.
little knee jerks. They're not my fist
Yeah.
up in the air. They're just a
And
little.
one of the things I've noticed is that although sometimes the reactions are there, I've also got this observer, that
Mhm.
is looking above and saying, "Oh, isn't that interesting? This is what's getting triggered. Oh, yeah, that's old." And there's the reaction without so much attachment, emotional attachment to it.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And that observer is really key. You got to have that observing mind so you can observe what is happening in meditation, what you're feeling, so you can observe it and heal it by talking to yourself, dialoguing with yourself. So, in a weird way, you're playing all the roles of the play. Again, I sort
Uh-huh.
of wrote
I love
the
that.
play. So, you're the writer, you're the director, and you're playing all the roles. And so you're healing some roles and you're lifting some roles to become leaders that have been pushed to the side.
Uh-huh.
I had to bring up that positive inner voice that had been pushed aside by the critical inner voice. There's
Right.
so many things you can do. Well, you're a therapist, so you know exactly what I'm
No,
talking
I'm
about.
I'm not a therapist. I'm a healer. I do,
Oh,
self,
okay. Well,
you know,
you've got
but
that
I've spent
therapy.
I've spent a long time in therapy.
Okay,
So
well, you've got that therapist feeling about you. So, and you talked about the observer. So
thank you. That's quite the compliment.
it's quite fascinating. The other thing I learned by writing the book, and really writing the book to show myself what I had done,
Uh-huh.
is to realize that you can find that forgiveness for other people. Now, forgiveness is tricky. People go, I let it go. Well, that's
Right.
different than forgiving somebody. Letting it go is, I think, putting it on a shelf where it will raise its ugly head at some point.
Interesting.
At
So
least
so
that's what I
how do
found.
you go about actually, getting beyond letting it go and putting it up on that shelf and truly forgiving somebody?
Well, the only way it worked for me, again, this is how I did it. It's not the only way, but
Uh-huh.
how I did it was by owning my past behaviors from the lack of self-love. The
Uh-huh.
times I was a bully to a friend or to wherever I was, the times I was a bully, the
Sure.
time I was judgmental, the time I needed to be right. I looked at my past behaviors and I was able to find forgiveness for myself because I realized I was so lacking in self-love. How could I have responded any differently?
Mhm.
When I realized that, I did the same thing for the people who had harmed me. My
Right.
sister, she was so hateful and so abusive, but I thought, well, what must she be feeling inside of herself
Right.
to be so hateful towards me? Because I was hateful towards somebody because I was lacking in self love, not feeling worthy or lovable or loved. What must she feel? So you end up having compassionate understanding for them. I still had
Mhm.
boundaries. I
Yeah.
still had my boundaries, so she couldn't, you know, cross those boundaries. But I
Right.
was able to have compassionate understanding.
Yeah.
And that took me some time to figure out.
And for me, one of my shadow sides has been the need to be right. And I've come to recognize that because of some dysfunction in my family when I was growing up, was striving to be perfect. And that if I were wrong, somehow I wasn't perfect. And so it's helped me clear some, it's not always gone. But it's interesting to me because when I see that same thing in somebody else, I understand that it's an attachment based on a fear, based on a wound. And it doesn't mean that it's not, always frustrating dealing with somebody who's a know-it-all when it's like you want to present them with the facts, like, wait a minute, what about this? And they're just so sure. But it does help to understand my own issues when interacting with others.
That is really what I learned is that what I know about myself, I can use on other people.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why I say these people used to say, well, self-love is selfish. And I said, no, no, no. Self-love is understanding yourself so that you can be compassionate with yourself, so that you can be compassionate with other people, more
Right.
kind with other people, more accepting of other people. But you really can't do that if you're not doing it with yourself. You're
Yeah,
sort of
and that
doing
compassion piece, it's like, I think that self-love, I think for many, this is just acceptance, right? But they can't go to the compassion part of it. Why is it important to get to that level of compassion towards ourselves?
Well, I think compassion comes from a deep, deep place in the heart. It's not just on the surface, but it's a deep level in the heart. And I think that compassion makes you wrap your arms around yourself in a sense and say, I hear you and I'm sorry you went through this and I feel for you. And I know why you did behave badly or why you needed to be
Uh-huh.
right or why you needed to be a bully. I get it. And you hug yourself. That compassion opens your heart to receive more love from the universe in a sense.
Mhm.
And when you're compassionate with yourself, really compassionate with yourself, because I had to be compassionate the times I realized I was a bully to people
Mhm.
and I realized why I was a bully, I was able to do the same thing with other people. I still have boundaries, but I
Right.
was able to offer that compassion to other people. Doesn't mean I want to hang out with everybody I meet. We
Sure.
have our likes and dislikes, but I can still have compassion for their
So
behavior.
you said the B word twice, boundaries. W- Why are boundaries important for us as we do our inner work and as we move forward through self-love?
Oh, I think boundaries are vital. I actually had boundaries as a small person because I used to tell my parents, we have issues we need to deal with here. So
Sure.
I already had boundaries, but those boundaries kept getting overrun by the adults or my sister. People who were
Yeah.
older than me kept overrunning my boundaries. If there was a tantrum that went on for an hour, then suddenly the door would be knocked and we were supposed to play cards now because my
Mm.
sister had vented all her anger. Well, I didn't want to play cards then. She had just ripped my guts out. Why would I want to play
Right.
cards with her? I had boundaries, but they kept getting overrun.
Yeah.
So once my mother left, that was one of the gifts I gave back to myself because I kept letting my mother make the decisions in the family. All right, we'll let my sister come over. I was able to put my boundaries back into place. I think
Uh-huh.
boundaries are vital, and I think women especially because we're people pleasers. We're told to be people pleasers, which is just really another safety net to protect yourself.
Uh-huh.
We need our boundaries.
And I think about even something as basic as girls being told to smile more or to kiss their uncle when he walks through the door, even though they don't want to. That pressure to be nice has us automatically trained to, let go of our boundaries, at least to a certain degree.
I think that need to be nice needs to be thrown out. I think we need to be kind. We
Uh-huh.
need to be
Oh,
generous, but we
I
don't need
like
to
that
be nice.
distinction. Tell me more about the kindness versus being nice.
Being nice is kissing the uncle when he walks through the door and you don't want to kiss that uncle.
Uh-huh.
Being nice is smiling even though you're in a bad mood that day. You don't feel like friggin' smiling that moment.
Right,
Being nice is about, being putting your arms around people and just doing all those things that you're told you're supposed to do because you're the girl.
right.
Being kind is, first of all, kindness starts with being kind with yourself.
Uh-huh.
So everything starts with the self. That's the thing I learned in self-love. When you're kind with yourself, it's much easier to be kind to others. Kind is saying, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to disagree with you.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Being nice is, oh, okay, that's a good idea because I don't
Uh-huh.
want to cause anything to ruffle here. That's
Yeah.
being
I love
nice.
that distinction. That's great.
But being kind is saying, I hear you, but I think you're wrong.
Uh,
Yeah, that's being kind.
We have to go to another quick break, but stay tuned for more here in just a few moments. Welcome back. Joffrey, before we go any further, I want to make sure our listeners know how they can connect with you and what's going on in your professional world.
Well, let me mention my website. Let me get that out there. It's joffremcclung.com. But the easiest way to get to it is it's allaboutselflove.com. ITS,
Okay.
all about self-love. That's one word,
Okay.
.com.
And Joffre McClung is Joffremcclung.com.
Exactly. And you can read my blogs. I do 1-minute videos. What you're going to hit while you're doing self-love work. I do
Uh-huh.
some blog writing. I just put a meditation up there today, a quick 15-minute to create your safe, loving space so you can lift your spirit during this crisis period.
Yeah.
So it's something to check out, the blog. It's a little small blog, but it's doing its thing.
So, given that our world has become less certain than we thought it used to be, we had this belief that, it was easy to stay healthy, and that for many people that they had jobs they didn't need to worry about, and finances were tight, but they could still survive, or that they really didn't need that health care, and so they didn't pay for the insurance, whatever it is. Things have been turned upside down in many ways. Why is it that now in particular is it a very important time for self-love?
Well, I think self-love tends to happen to people when things are at their lowest. I
Mm,
would not have looked for my
mm,
self-love unless I'd hit a dark night of the soul, so to speak.
uh-huh,
I had two dark nights, the first one in New York and the one after my mother passed.
right.
We don't tend to look to change our lives until our lives aren't working. So in a weird
Mm,
way, even though everything's at a loss and everything, we're all panicked and wondering what's happening, it's actually a good time to look inward and say, okay, what's not working for me inwardly? What do I
right.
need to change inwardly? We don't change things when things are going smoothly. We just don't. So
Mm,
in a weird way, it could be a gift from the universe to bump up our sense of self-love.
uh-huh. Do you think there are some other important messages from the universe with this COVID-19 situation?
Well, I think there's several things that we've been hitting the last couple of years, frankly. I think the sense of integrity,
Uh-huh.
that we've let things, and I think we're all guilty of it, let things go on. Well, that's just politicians. They tell tales. That's what they do.
Yeah.
Well, why is
Yeah.
that okay? That's really not okay. I
Mm,
think integrity is important, and you cannot expect your politicians to have integrity and honesty, which is sort of cousins of each other, if
uh-huh.
you're not practicing integrity and honesty with yourself and with people in your life. So in a
Right.
weird way, the universe is saying, okay, you guys are leaping to a new level. Here's what you need to change in order to leap further. You've got
Yeah.
to have more integrity. You've got to be honest.
And I also think there's the aspect of boundaries that you were talking about before. I think about the relationship between, say, narcissists and empaths,
Hmm.
where there's like this symbiotic, toxic dysfunction, and it's like when you're dealing with a narcissist, they do a lot of gaslighting. You question yourself. You think, oh, I'm wrong, or I just need to like work around the situation so that I get what I need. And you end up questioning yourself and putting yourself down and feeling a sense of futility. And so I think that there's that shadow side too of how we enable that kind of dysfunction, the narcissism, the lack of integrity. And we need to question how we can take action and deal with our own shadow side of the enabling in order to shift things in our world.
You said that absolutely beautifully, I must say.
Thanks.
That narcissism, again, I experienced that within my family.
Uh-huh.
It can be very brutal because it makes you think you're doing something wrong. It's your fault.
Right.
And we do enable it. And I think part of that is our safety net of needing to be right. My side's right, therefore your side's wrong. The
Uh-huh.
tribal mentality that we've moved into.
Yes.
All
Yes.
of that coming from that sense of, I need to be right, I need to be in control. And it doesn't matter if I'm lying about it. I can
Mm.
still lie about it, and I can still do it. I can still enable this narcissistic behavior to go forward as long as I'm right. Our team's right. Well,
Mm.
eventually this coronavirus has shown us it doesn't matter what side you're on,
Mm.
it will come for everyone. It
Right.
will pass us by through all of us. So in a weird way, it's sort of a gift saying, okay, we've all had our little tribal sides. Now we're all in this together.
Yeah. Great point.
So
Great
it
point.
I do believe everything, just like we were talking about our childhood and our wounds, it's really to help us to grow and to expand our sense of love. I think even our outside world or what's happening in politics in the in social world really is a chance for us to grow even further.
Uh-huh.
It may look ugly to begin with, and
Yeah.
it's kind of
It,
ugly, but
it
it's to
does.
help us grow further.
And I think that for those of us who have control issues, it really triggers us. And it's the sort of thing where, first of all, although we do have a lot of control over our health, we don't have complete control.
No.
Although we think we have freedom and control over our lives, there are many ways we don't. And so we're going to have to let go and allow and observe and navigate these somewhat troubled waters in a way that we're not used to navigating.
Oh, I think that's definitely true. I mean, I have realized, okay, everything changed in my life. I'm suddenly sitting at home. I'm not going to the gym. I'm not doing certain things.
Uh-huh.
And we're being told we don't know how long this is going to last.
Right.
That's unnerving.
It
Just
is.
told we won't know how long this will last. The good news is, okay, you're home. What are you going to do?
Uh-huh.
Are you going to use it to continue to grow? Are you going to look inward? Are you going to make changes? Are you going to read books? Going to listen to tapes? Whatever you need to do, it's a
Uh-huh.
good chance to do some inner growth so we can have those boundaries. We don't
Sure.
need to enable our narcissistic. We don't need to be right to make everybody else wrong.
Right.
And we can grow in our sense of integrity and honesty. And when we do that, we'll have politics that are based on honesty and integrity. We won't
Yes.
have narcissistic tendencies.
Uh,
Our boundaries will be in place. We don't need to be nice. We can be kind.
yeah.
All those things will begin to happen.
And I think that there's an important piece of it that it's just like dealing with our shadow side. The fear, in a sense, is one of our shadows that occasionally will rear its ugly head in huge ways. And it's an opportunity to be sensible, be concerned, to set in, whatever physical boundaries and other kinds of boundaries that are important, but not to get totally sucked into that fear that's just like that snowball that's rolling down the hill, getting bigger and bigger.
I have to say, I've noticed the fear level has risen a bit. I'm dealing with it. I'm doing my meditation and I lift it up and out because mine was dealing with money.
Yeah.
Because I was given some money and suddenly that money is half what it was
Uh-huh.
in
Yeah.
2 weeks. I'm like, wait a minute, I needed that money to survive.
Uh-huh.
So I can start to get a little wiggy. Well, I stopped getting wiggy and I say, no, I have faith. I've been here before. I've been where I've had nothing and
Uh-huh.
gotten something. I've been here
Yeah.
before. I will be safe. I do what I can. And then you just have to have faith.
Yeah. And on that great note of having faith, I want to close out the show. JoffreMcClung.com. And what's the other way to get to the website?
It's all about self-love.com. And I am rewriting the second book, The Heart of the Matter. It will have much more of my personal story in it very soon.
And it's great. And they're how-tos. I want to thank you for joining us here today. I want to thank Benny. I want to thank the staff at TTR. I also want to thank Kyle for all that they do to put this show together. And I want to thank you, the listener, the viewer, for showing up here today. And I invite you to show up in your own life. Thanks, everybody.